What is going on YouTube? Matty Ice here, and today we are talking college football, and we are talking about not only college football, we are talking about the ACC and my predictions for what will happen during this year's 2016 football season. We're starting off in the Atlantic, and of course, if you don't know, the teams who are in the Atlantic are Florida State, Clemson, Louisville, North Carolina State, Boston College, Syracuse, and Wake Forest. And there's a lot of talk about who is going to win what this year, and anything can happen. The first team we're going to talk about is Florida State. My biggest concern is, can they find a quarterback to replace Jameis Winston? You know, they have a few guys coming in that can play the game, and you know, you got Sean McGuire, who was starting quarterback last year, and you know, he got hurt a little bit and couldn't play to his full potential, but I believe he will be the starting quarterback. I'm not too worried about Florida State winning because that's what Jimbo Fisher does. He knows how to win, and he's got athletes all around the football field. So it's no doubt that Florida State is going to be winning big this year. The question is, can they be number one? Can they be number two in the ACC and make it to a college football New Year's Eve bowl game? You know, the choices are up there, but they have to do it for themselves. Moving on to Clemson, probably the number one team in the country right now. I think they are projected number one or number two in the top 25, but I believe they are the number one team in the country with returning quarterback Josh Watson, and you know, he's going to be a standout guy this year. I believe he is going to win the Heisman Trophy, and you know, Dabo Swinney, he's coming off, you know, a good season from last year. You know, they were runner-up in the national championship game. I do believe they can go to the national championship again and win the whole thing this year. You know, a lot of people have questions about their defense, but you got to think last year they didn't have that many stars coming on defense. You know, offensively is going to be their strong suit. They did lose one or two positions, but their quarterback, he is going to play well this season. If he plays well this season, they will win the ACC and they will get a shot at winning the national championship. Moving on to Louisville, and this is a team that can shock a lot of people. First of all, Rick Pitino, the head coach, you know, he knows what he's doing on his side of the ball. And Lamar Jackson, the starting quarterback for Louisville, I believe that they can win games this year. But the problem is they're in the tough Atlantic division of the ACC, and anything can happen at that with those few teams that I just talked about. But, you know, they win a few games here and there. They can compete big for what they got. Moving on to North Carolina State, I still believe they're going to be the upset team this year. You know, they always have the potential of upsetting a number one or a number two country, and, you know, they don't look like it. Last year they did beat Texas A&M in the bowl game, and I believe that they can be better this year than what they were last year. I still think, though, they're going to come up 8-5, maybe 9-4. It just depends, but they're going to be a good team this year. Moving on to Boston College, can they get back into the running game of which they have the past few years? You know, anything can happen with them this year. I do believe they're going to make at least 6-6. They will go to a bowl game, but they have to do it for themselves. And I do believe that they can compete in the ACC, but again, they're in the Atlantic Division. They have a lot of hard teams to face. Moving on to Syracuse, can they get in the ACC topic? Can they be one of the big ACC teams that compete not only in basketball but in football? It just depends on what they do. And finally, we talk about Wake Forest. Can they make it to a bowl game? Can they win a few good games this year? I don't see that happening again with Wake Forest. And now for my predictions with the Atlantic Division, we have at last place Wake Forest. For number 6 is Syracuse. At number 5 is Boston College. Now, the top 4 teams, I believe any one of these teams can win the ACC, whoever comes out of the Atlantic Division. But at the number 4 spot, I have North Carolina State, simply because the fact that they can't, but they're not at the high caliber as the next 3. For number 3, I have Florida State. coming in at the ACC at the Atlantic Division. And for number 2, I'm going with Louisville. The fact that Lamar Jackson, I think he can get it done for the Cardinals, but I do not think they have in their power to beat Clemson this year. I believe Clemson can repeat, go undefeated again. I mean, let's face it, Joshua Watson and Dabo Swinney, they know how to get the job done. So I believe they will win the ACC Atlantic Division this year. Now moving on to the Coastal Division. The teams in this area are Georgia Tech, Duke, Virginia Tech, Pittsburgh, North Carolina, Miami, and Virginia. Starting off with Georgia Tech, they had just a bad season last year. You know, they won their first 2 games, putting up 70 points, and everybody was projecting that they were going to be the team that could win the Coastal and possibly the ACC, but you know, they lost a heartbreaker to Notre Dame, and it just kind of went downhill from there. They did have one of the biggest plays of the year last year with a block kick to beat Florida State last year. And, you know, going 3-9, Paul Johnson, he's going to have something going on good for this season. But I think he can get it done with that triple option offense that he runs, and the quarterback Justin Thomas, who I believe is one of the most talented guys not only in the ACC but in the whole college football era. And you know, when you play a triple option team, it's hard to stop it, especially when you have a week to prepare for it. So I believe that if Georgia Tech can get everything together, they can be doing real good this season. Now moving on to Duke. Can they get back at it? Can they go back to the ACC and win the Coastal? It's a toss-up for me. I have them going at least 7-5, going maybe 8-4. So it just depends on what's going to happen to them this year. And moving on to Virginia Tech, the new sheriff in town, Justin Fuente, who was head coach of Memphis last year. Now he's the new head coach at Virginia Tech to replace Frank Beamer. Virginia Tech still has the longest record of making it to the bowl games. I still believe they're going to get into a bowl game this year. You know, you're going to have to give Justin a little bit time to coach in there. I mean, it took him a little time at Memphis, and look how good they did this past year. I believe they're going to go at least 6-6, 7-5. It just depends on how they do. Moving on to Pittsburgh. Can they keep up the success from what they had last year and move on to this year? You know, I believe they went 7-5, 7-6 last year. I believe that they can get the job done, especially that they're in the Coastal. You know, they have the possibility of going at least 3-2-1 in the Coastal, but, you know, I just don't see them doing that this year. Now we're moving on to North Carolina. They were the upset team last year. They won the Coastal and should have beaten Clemson last year in the ACC Championship. And with defensive coordinator Gene Chizik, he can get the job done. But a lot of questions came in concern when they gave up 40 points against Baylor in the bowl game last year. We're going to see what happens to them this year. I believe they can win it. We'll just find out wins. But the University of Miami, a.k.a. the U, new head coach Mark Richt, transferring from the Georgia Bulldogs. You got to give him a little time, but with the talent that he has coming into Miami, I believe he can get the job done his first year. I don't think he can win a national championship, but I do believe that they can be really, really successful in the ACC this year, especially with Brad Kaya at quarterback. You know, I believe he's also one of the best athletes in the ACC and in the country at quarterback. So we're going to just find out what happens to him this year. And last team is Virginia. Can they keep up the success of what's been going on? You know, they did make it to a bowl game. They did go 6-6 last year. So I believe that they can do it. It's, you know, they're in the Coastal, but they just have to do what they have to do. And for my predictions on what's going to happen in the Coastal this year, coming in last place, I do have Virginia. At number 6, I do have Duke. At number 5 is Pittsburgh. For number 4, I have Virginia Tech. I believe Justin Fuente has got a little work to do, but he can get the job done if you give him a few years. At number 3, it's a little toss-up between these 3 teams. I'm going with Georgia Tech and Paul Johnson, simply because of the fact that they got a lot of freshmen that are going to have to be playing for them this year, but I believe that they will do better than 3-9. I do believe they will be the number 3 team coming out of the Coastal this year, and who knows, they can win the Coastal and can compete for the ACC championship. For number 2, I have North Carolina, simply because of the fact that they lost a lot of guys last year. They can get the job done, but I'm giving it to Miami this year to win the Coastal. I believe Mark Richt can get something done down there at Miami. And, if he was in the Atlantic, it'd be a whole different story. But since Miami is in the Coastal, I have them winning the ACC Coastal this year. And between it's Clemson and Miami for the ACC championship, I'm going to go with Clemson. Simply Joshua Watson, Dabo Swinney, what else is there to say? So that is my predictions on what will happen this year to the ACC.